Welcome to the class where tech takes the lead. Adam Todd here with just what you need. Teachers everywhere, let's elevate the game. With digital tools, we'll never be the same. In this podcast, we'll uncover the trends, from apps to gadgets on which we depend. Connect with your students in ways so fresh, innovative minds put to the test. In this podcast, we'll uncover the trends, from apps to gadgets on which we depend. Connect with your students in ways so fresh, innovative minds put to the test. Classroom dynamics where we all unite. Education future shining bright, with Adam Todd guiding us through. Teachers' paradise coming true.
Classroom Dynamics is supported by Logitech. As education continues to evolve, so does Logitech Education, your partner in content creation for the classroom. With Logitech's cutting-edge technology, students not only learn but also become content creators. Whether it's in person or online, Logitech's tools are designed to inspire educators and learners alike. Capture every educational moment in stunning detail and edit, produce, and share your creative journey with ease. Logitech Education, inspiring the next generation of creators. For more, visit logitech.com/education, transforming classrooms one innovation at a time.
For over 20 years, Higher Ground has designed functional technology protection, helping students to work or learn anytime, anywhere. I'm Mark, president of Higher Ground, and I want to share with you how you can get a free sample of any of our rugged shells, sleeves, or clear backpacks. Visit hggear.com/sample and use your school's email and address. One thing, don't tell Alex because he'll be stuck with all the paperwork. Request yours and see for yourself how Higher Ground can help save your students and school downtime and money. Just remember, don't tell Alex.
Mark, what are all these sample requests filling my inbox?
Welcome to Classroom Dynamics, the podcast where we get into the exciting world of technology and education. Hi everybody, I'm your host Adam Todd, and today on the show we're honored to feature Dr. Dwayne Wood, an associate professor at National University and a renowned expert in instructional design and pedagogy. Dr. Wood's approach to education is both innovative and transformative, drawing from his distinguished military service to infuse discipline and structure into his teaching while embracing creativity and adaptability. His expertise spans designing engaging curricula, creating tailored learning materials, and developing effective educational experiences, particularly for adult learners. At the core of his work is the belief that education can shape minds and transform lives, a belief that has empowered countless students and educators alike. Today, Dr. Wood is here to share insights into how he's shaping the future of education and the strategies he's using to inspire and empower others. It's all next on Classroom Dynamics, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Teachers, are you looking for resources that spark creativity and inspire learning? Look no further than Highly Motivated on Teachers Pay Teachers. From comprehensive lesson plans and interactive lab books to engaging informational test prep passages, Highly Motivated has everything you need to keep your students motivated and excited to learn. Whether it's a quick activity or a full unit, these resources are designed to save you time and help students succeed. Highly Motivated, motivating teaching resources that engage and inspire. Search Highly Motivated on Teachers Pay Teachers today. He's an instructional designer and associate professor at National University and a renowned expert in instructional design. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Dwayne Wood to Classroom Dynamics. Welcome to the show. Very excited to have you on today to talk all about AI and the future of AI and how that's going to be so important for teachers in the classroom. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And, I apologize a little bit up front here. I got a little bit of a cold, but I didn't want to miss this opportunity to have this conversation. So I really thank you for the introduction. That was fantastic. I kind of think of myself, not necessarily like the expert in this kind of area in this technology. I like to think of myself as just an educator trying to do the best for my students, and so, when these things come out, I want to think about, all right, how am I leveraging this? What are the risks? How am I mitigating those risks? Because ultimately the goal is student learning, and that student learning is aligned with how that student's going to use that information in the real world. So that's what I think about in the bigger picture, right? When I start thinking about this stuff, and right now, this artificial intelligence is the thing, right? That we're in the impacts we're seeing. So this has been occupying my mind as an educator, especially coming from in higher education, where the traditional assessment model is the research paper or essay. And I know we'll talk further on what, kind of the impacts there, but, a little bit of background for me and why I kind of probably think this way is, I'm an old soldier. I spent 20 years in the Army, and I seen training, right, and education in the service evolve over time. And one of the things I noticed is, the way we go about things, we really need to be thinking towards the future, because if we're training for current requirements, we're going to be behind. So we have to kind of think for the future. As an example, land navigation. How many people today can navigate using a map and compass? It's a lost skill. But, my parents and grandparents, that's how they got around. They used the map. They understood cardinal directions and, how to, now we have GPS technology. This kind of replaced that skill. I've seen this happen in the Army also. The compass and map was considered basic land navigation, and then the compass and map went to advanced land navigation. Now it's back to basic, because the Army recognized that was a skill that's still needed, so they had to go back and retrain it to the level of proficiency, and not completely depend on the GPS. So that's kind of, we didn't know we lost that skill until we needed to use it.
Right.
So
and everyone's not going to have Google Maps in their back pocket all the time either, right?
Yeah, it's the I had a leader a long time ago when I was a young soldier. We had this idea called technical and tactical competence, right? So technical is the use of tools and all that type of stuff, and the tactical is how you apply it within. And he told me right up front, he's like, "Look, don't consider yourself technically or tactically competent unless you can accomplish it without technology." And that kind of stuck with me, and that's a military context, right? That necessarily doesn't apply, to maybe first responders and stuff. That could be important, right? Because they're responding when maybe this technology is not working, right? So they have to have those skills set. But again, that always kept me thinking and helped me think through that process. And then the idea of, in the service, we always were the idea of mission focused. What's the goal? And I'm putting all my effort to achieve that. To me, it's the same thing in education. I got a learning outcome, and that learning outcome's been vetted, right? It's an applicable skill or knowledge or attribute that's required for some form of task or something in the real world, either in the world of work or just in life. So I need to be able to adapt what I'm doing within the classroom to achieve that outcome. Why I think that's important is because in our education system, I think we have what I would call an industry-based system, right? We make the assumption that all the inputs coming to us are the same. I think that's a bad assumption. And then we apply, a set procedures, and we produce this standard outcome. Again, I understand why we do that, right? It's resource efficient, right? We're trying to use very limited resources to produce something. I get it, but there's probably a lot of folks that don't fit that model, and they're going to fall outside. So how do we adapt that? Well, the outcome doesn't change, but how I help students achieve that outcome does.
Right. So generative AI is taking the educational world by storm. That's happening. It's been happening. It continues to happen. You teach teachers that are teaching, that you professional development, you're teaching them who want to become teachers. How do you see that generative AI impact on the world of education as we use it more and more, and as it changes almost minute by minute?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about changes. This is my profession, and I have a hard time keeping up with all the stuff that's being published, all the changes that are happening, right? And then having time to reflect on that, and how does that impact, right? How's that going to change my practice? So when I work with these, they're students for me, but they're practicing teachers, right? And educators and instructional designers, so they're in the realm of education, and I like to do it. And the best way that I found to do this is in a very experiential way. So I'm not just going to come out and tell you, hey, this is the tool. Here's the left and right limits. Here's the boundaries, limitations, ethical considerations. I'm going to give you a task, and I want you to perform that task. And then I want you to reflect on that task. What did you notice about how this tool helped you achieve that task? And what I'm trying to do is encourage or provide the conditions for greater critical thinking and metacognition. Now, I think many people would say, well, isn't that like a goal of education? Yes, right. It is. But if you think about how AI, specifically generative AI, is going to have an impact on our education, when I think about this, I think the process of learning becomes more important than the product. In traditional, right, we're like, how do we know that a student met the outcomes that we established? Well, we take a product that they produce and we evaluate it using a rubric, right? And we assign a grade. And that grade's supposed to be an approximation of their skill with whatever that, task was. Well, with generative AI, if it's producing that product, how do we know that the student actually met that outcome. So again, we have to think through the process. There's an analogy that I like to use to educators, and I think about this as like formative assessment. So in formative assessment, we kind of evaluate with no stakes, right? We evaluate during the stages of learning. Well, what if you could break down the task and have the student collaborate with AI at each phase of the task and then reflect on that aspect? So critical thinking and metacognition, we're achieving those even though that the AI is producing the product. So the process becomes more important than the product. I wouldn't say throw out the product, right? The product still needs to be evaluated, but it's less important. So when you talk about how do we achieve that with educators, if you look at the rubrics we use, the end product has a less weight. The process of getting to that product has more weight. When I think about how it's going to change, it's not necessarily maybe, we have to have, if you read the news and all the articles and stuff that come out, some people propose, complete flip, right? We need a completely new model for education. I don't think we need a completely new model. I think we need to just think about how the student is this AI collaboration. How is that happening? Because I think we're going to have an opportunity cost. We're going to have to choose, maybe writing ability becomes less important. Critical thinking, creative thinking, cultural competency, information literacy, these skills take a higher priority than writing. We've already seen this, right? Cursive writing. How many kindergarten students learn cursive writing nowadays? Very few, because of the digital world, right? We don't need it.
And their handwriting is horrendous because of it.
Yeah, and I'm sad to say my handwriting is absolutely atrocious. Though I was taught cursive in school, right? That's how many times are we handwriting things now? I remember, you have to fill out a check. How many times are people filling out checks nowadays? Right. I mean, so those things are becoming less and less. So we have to kind of decide. I think we can't do everything.
Right.
So there's going to
you even have you hit it on the head right there. It's less and less. The old style of school and education is happening less and less. The things that we as adults were taught is almost extinct. Almost. It really is. You could almost say those are so far gone that they are extinct, that you really have to start to figure out how to express what they're learning in today's world, right? And experience is half the battle. If they don't have that experience on how to do it, they're not going to be able to do that, So let me ask you this. You just did some research about generative AI. And in your recent research, you explored the impact of generative AI on student engagement and also ethical considerations. So what were some of the most surprising insights from that particular study?
So one of the things that we looked at in that study was, would we need new instructional strategies, right? Would we have to come up with a completely new, when we're using AI as an instructional tool? So when I first sat down to think about this, and we were thinking about, we were actually designing the course first. And some of the guidance we got was, integrate AI, because the big thought process was, we're producing instructional designers and teachers for the real world. In the L&D, so learning and development sector of instructional design, AI use is almost normalized now. So when we think about that, we're like, if we have a student leave this course and they get their certificate and we call them certified, and they go to an interview for an instructional design position, and the question they ask is, what's your knowledge about using AI in the instructional design process? They can't answer it. So I thought we're doing them a disservice. So we needed to be able to provide this experience in this knowledge and how to use this within the instructional design context. And what I thought was funny, in the first iteration of the course, not that we taught it, but the first design iteration that we did, the first prototype, we looked at it and we're like, this is a course on AI. This is not a course on instructional design. And we had to go back and okay, how do we do this? And that was one of the challenges in the design of it. Another challenge was, we use a discussion platform that's AI run, and it uses an AI detection tool. So then we're like, how do we use a tool that is supposed to discourage AI use, but we want to encourage it? So that there was a bunch of challenges.
You see how fast AI can take over?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah,
it can take over, and that's the hard part.
So getting back, to your question, I'm sorry, I got a little off there, but some big things we learned. One, best practices and instructional strategies still work. They still work with AI, but like we talked about, we had to change in how we looked at it. Again, more focus on the process versus that product. And that's, we tried to develop some frameworks and stuff to help us think about that as we were, interacting with students and seeing the data and seeing what students are saying, understanding their experience, and the other thing we learned that I honestly, more and more I reflect on it, And after I've taught this course a number of times now, transparency, being completely transparent between the instructor, facilitator, coach, mentor, whatever you want to call it, and the student and the learner. That matters more, right? Just understanding that, look, hey, I got it. And now, granted, we did use like some artificial barriers. And what I mean by that is, in a specific assignment, we'd be like, okay, you can use AI to do these kind of tasks within this assignment. And that was done for a couple reasons. One, we understood that the audience coming to this, or the learners coming to this course, had very little knowledge or use of experience using this technology, and especially in an instructional design context. So we need to scaffold them, which is another best practice, right? So it still works. And then, we also took this way of a very experiential way. And one of the, yes, they're an assignment, but I like to call them activities. One of the activities in this is we provide them 3 or 4 articles, peer-reviewed articles about academic integrity, responsible use, ethical use of this generative AI in education. But we don't have the students read them. We have them use Gen AI and then use that to help them understand the academic integrity, responsible use. So it's kind of like this experiential, this loop, right, that you produce. And there's also good. Again, we're just using best practices in instructional design anyways. It matters what the student's doing, right? It's why I like to think of myself, and I tell the students right up front in this course, is like, think of me as like your peer coach, right? As we're going through this, don't think of me as like the traditional professor or instructor where I'm going to transmit all this great knowledge to you and you're going to go out and do great things. No, think of me as you're going to do a task and I'm here to help you, coach you along. And I like that approach. In that my philosophy is really much based on learning focused, not grade focused.
Right. It's a little backwards design too in there for them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The task we give them, again, making the task as authentic as you can, right? That, to me, that's extremely important. And I tell students and teachers all the time is like, can you help your learner make the connection of what you're doing to the real world? Because in my mind, if I can't do that, I'm wasting your time. Right? Why are you taking this course? Because if you're not going to be able to apply this in the real world in your context to improve your practice, why do it? That's one of the reasons, like one of the final assignments in this, we actually have them reflect forward. What did you pick up in this course and how are you going to apply it in your current practice? Right. One, it helps them take ownership of the learning, right, as they go forward. I'm also hopeful that it produces like some more curiosity to go out and go through this. But, the data, we collected data like a pre and post, right, where we asked them about, what's your understanding, about the ethical and responsible use of these technologies? Of course, it was pretty low because most people didn't have any, they had no idea. By the end, it was like unanimous. We learned so much about how this, all the pitfalls in this, how, the risks here, but we also picked up on there's opportunities to improve student learning. And that can be a fine line. So when we finished this, I was very hopeful that, one, current best practices still work. But you have to think about them a little bit differently, but you can apply them the same way. Where I think this gets a little even more nuanced is in the actual instructional design process. So I can use AI throughout any, I can take any model. Say I take the ADDIE model. I can apply generative AI at every phase to produce some kind of deliverable or output at that phase. We could argue how good it is, right? After it produces it. But I can use that going through it. My concern is, and it comes down to my definition of, a novice instructional designer versus a master instructional designer. A novice follows a process, right? So they follow, I do step 1, I do step 2, I do step 3. A master will modify the process to meet the context and then tell you why they made those decisions and how it'll impact the project and student learning. Right. So there's a huge gap there, right, between that. Well, if we have a novice instructional designer using this technology as they go through the process, are they ever going to become a master? So that's a good point. Right. That's, to me, that's a little bit of a concern, right? Can it be mitigated? Absolutely. But it becomes down to our approach. How are we approaching it and how are we using this technology? Because I don't want it to degrade our normal human intelligence, right? Critical thinking, those aspects, because we start to lose those, then I think now we're going down the wrong path.
Right. And then you're not going to hear one of your students or a teacher who's trying to get to that point where they feel comfortable with it say, oh, when am I ever going to use this? I'm learning something. When am I ever going to use this? Oh, you're going to use it if you're experiencing it. You're going to use it if you're really getting that bottom line experience. that's when it's going to come into play, and they'll be very thankful in the end because of it.
Yeah, I seen, as a teacher, you like to see those light bulb moments, right? I mean, that's the intrinsic value of being. And I think if you ask most teachers, that's why they get into teaching, because of those light bulb moments.
Right.
We have them do like one of the activities is we have them modify prompts to change the tone or to change maybe a little bit of the pathway, what they're asking for. And, what they come up with is like, you know what? AI is like it's going to give me what I asked for. Yes. So on top of like normal bias that can be in the training data that produces it, just by how you ask the question, you're injecting confirmation bias automatically. So you can almost think about every prompt I do, except some very detailed prompts, I'm injecting confirmation bias automatically. And that's when the light bulb goes off for these students. They're like, oh my goodness, no matter what I do in this system, if I'm using it, I need to be on guard for confirmation bias. And I in my opinion, you have to be on guard anyways. No matter what we're doing, that's just confirmation bias is going to happen. That's just a natural human tendency. You have to actively work against it, right? To kind of counter it. So let
me ask you this then. With that said, do you think that we almost have to start to rethink how we teach teachers to teach moving forward down the line here?
I don't know if the technology's where that point is, and you kind of alluded to it. And I wish I wrote down the way you kind of described it, because I think you articulated it very well. We're like in this like phase transition. So it's not the old way, but we don't know what the new. We can almost think the new is like a question mark. Mm-hmm. We're somewhere in the middle.
You're in a very gray spot. That's
a very hard question for me to respond to, but it's almost like, well, it depends. What's the context we're in? The discipline. One of the light bulb moments for students in this course is they're like, you know what? I asked this something where I didn't have a lot of domain knowledge, and I didn't know if it was right or wrong. Mm-hmm. So there's probably a correlation there, right? Depending on So I think that's important. In the same vein, I had a student ask me. They had in their teaching realm, they had a lot of non-English speakers. And one of the challenges for them is instructions and meanings of words and, just understanding, right, between communication. Like, could students use this tool to help me communicate better and get beyond this language barrier? So the discussion went, well, I said, I'm not a language. I'm very poor with languages. I just barely get by in English. So I could ask it to translate something, and I could think that that's what it is, but translation is not always a 1-for-1, right? And then there's
you don't really know if you're getting what you really want out of it, right?
Yeah, and connotations, right? Connotations of word usage. Mm-hmm. It varies, from in the cultures. So I could ask it to translate Spanish. Well, it might be going Spain Spanish, and not Puerto Rican Spanish. And there may be some cultural differences that get missed. It may create a problem. And that's what I mean about cultural competency is a natural human skill, knowledge, attribute, whatever you want to call it, that we have to cultivate. To me, that's something we need to start really looking at. Again, less on the writing ability, right? Because we have a tool that will help us with that, but more on those higher order thinking skills and metacognition. So when I say metacognition, it's thinking about your own thinking. Why do I believe that? How do I know that? Right. And being able to answer those questions and to challenge your own thinking. I hate to bring it up, but the most recent election, what kind of would happen if people actually challenged their own thinking? Maybe the result would be the same. I don't know, but I think there would be some deeper thought. Right. And why are we doing this? I also think there would be a lot of questions like, I don't have that information. Right. Where do I get that information? How do I evaluate the information that I get? To me, this is all related. Information literacy and this new technology of generative AI. One of the differences I think here too is that generative AI, when it came out, it was free. It's still free, right? There's all these platforms that are free. And anybody that has an internet access can use it. A concern for me is these technologies are going to become so robust that we're going to have to start paying for it. And you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? That's the capitalist model, right? We got this great tool. You're
going to reel them in with the free, but then when you really want to start using it for other things, you're going to have to start to pay for it.
My concern there is
you're actually seeing that with ChatGPT now, so it's already starting to kind of turn in that direction.
My concern is it's going to make the digital divide even wider, and it's really going to start making a big difference. Something in instructional design that I get when I talk with teachers and stuff, we got to make an instructional video. So they use like high def, 4K video. It's really great. But then I ask the question, can your students access this from home? And they're like, I don't know. Maybe you need to survey technology, right? And see how many people have broadband or, high capacity internet in their home. If it's very little, the high definition video does you nothing because they can't watch it from home. So you have to get more creative. Well, maybe we use some lower end video because they can use it at home, or maybe we have to reschedule how we do things within the classroom, right? Because we're trying to still achieve that learning outcome, but we have to understand our constraints. And it's really easy to focus on what is my constraint when I'm putting this together and not think about the target audience constraint. And, one of the things I have during this course that I have them do is they have to develop a learning persona so they can understand their audience. Again, they put some demographics in there, but I tell them, don't focus on the demographics. Focus on the challenges, barriers, preferences, right? Those things are going to have impact on how you design something for them to learn and how they're going to achieve the outcome. And that's always a light bulb moment. Boom. And trying to understand what are the barriers that this student or this category of student, right? Learning personas are like a category, a subset of your audience. What are the barriers here? And then how do I overcome that barrier, mitigate that barrier in my instructional design? And that's what we have them justify in their research paper. Not only is it like, okay, I think this. Well, what out there says, right? Again, metacognition. Why do you think that? And there's a couple like big themes in this program that we like to do. One is data-driven decision making. Perceived needs versus actual needs. How many decisions in education get made because it's a gut feeling? Now, granted, that gut feeling may be correct, but we need some data to make decisions off so we can actually see what's going on, right? And understand it so we can mitigate and improve, right? That's how we get there. The other thing is theory to practice. I can talk all day about educational theory, but if I do, are you able to apply it? Right? That's a skill that has to be developed. And students learn right away is like, oh yeah, that theory sounds really great. Doesn't really work in my context, right? So they have to start thinking about
put a group of kids in front of them, right, and see what happens.
Yeah. So I like to teach them the idea of almost like action research, because when you work with learners, we're humans. Right. We're so diverse. It's like putting infinity into a math problem. Everything is possible. Right. So how do your model can't account for all that. Right. So you have to think of the model as a way to think about what's happening, but your context may be different. So you have to be able to use what the model's kind of telling you, but modify it to work within your context. And that's the same kind of skill when we talked about, what's the difference between a novice and a master. That's it. Theory to practice. Right. And one of the things that I find that teachers have a problem too is they don't feel like their observation sometimes is data. I'm like, you're in the classroom all the time. You're a sensor. You're a data point. That it matters. They tend to focus more on the quantifiable, like grades and stuff. Yeah, that kind of tends to the end state, right? But it doesn't tell you the story of how or what happened. That's where you need that qualitative aspect, and to be able to look at that and understand what's happening so you can figure out what you're going to do to improve later on. So that's a skill. That's a skill. A positive aspect that I like about this Gen AI is you have to ask a question. And if you think about our education system, we're really good at, answering questions. Were we ever taught how to ask questions? And that's a skill in itself, this inquiry, being able to ask good questions. In the service, I learned right away, what makes a good leader? They know what questions to ask, right? So to me, getting better at asking questions, is a positive side effect, right? Or impact of this, because you got to ask it a question. Students put in like the simple prompt when they first start, right? Because they're just starting, they don't know. They ask it a simple question and they're like, boy, this is super general. Like, it doesn't really give me what I'm looking for. And then they start to like, maybe I got to be a lot more specific. And you're like, okay, yeah. Or change how your question's worded.
And that's exactly where higher order thinking questions come into play, because if you can start to prompt in an effective higher order thinking manner, you're going to get out exactly what you're looking for and be more specific as to what that result is versus just a willy-nilly, I need some answers, help me out, can you write this for me?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the big pieces of how this gets applied. Now I need to teach students how to ask questions. And to ask a good question, what do you need? Well, one, you need some domain knowledge, right? It's just inherent into asking a good question. Now, sometimes you have to start at nothing, right? And you just got to but again, AI can help this. I've asked it many times. The topic I'm looking to research is such and such. What search criteria would I use in a library? Just this, again, it may give me 100 results and 5 work, right? But it may have provided me something I wouldn't have thought of on my own. So that's why I like to, it can expand. I say can expand your perspectives. We have to understand, though, again, it's only as good as its training database. So if the training data is already biased on perspectives, you're not going to get right. So we have to understand that, that it's an algorithm, right? It's only producing what's statistically next. It doesn't see the big picture, and I like when that's another light bulb that goes off, when students are like, it didn't quite understand what I'm trying to do. Well, because it's only predicting what the next likely word or token or, is next. It doesn't see the big picture that you're seeing.
Right.
So you have to change how you ask a question to get the pieces maybe of what you're trying to achieve and work with it. One of the techniques that I had learned when you give it this prompt, right before responding, ask me questions, and then you respond to those questions, and it helps you get a lot more specific on what you're looking for. So I found that pretty effective. One of the things I like to explain to students too, they start seeing that, it's reading off previous chats, right? That it might not be within that chat. So it's starting to feed some. It's like sometimes you need to tell it, don't use anything previous, right? Because it'll start feeding. And if you have a paid version, sometimes the memories are longer, right? So it starts to read more right into, what you've done in the past in the system. So you have to be kind of aware of that, right? As you're working with these. That's getting really, really into the weeds here, but these are just
that is part of the deal. That's how it works. It will remember. And especially if you are a teacher or anyone who's using ChatGPT to write lesson plans or create assessments or higher order thinking questions that you want to ask during lessons, every now and then you will see it'll say memory updated. A little blurb comes up, memory updated. And so that, so at least when you're doing future prompts that relate to it, it's going to work out perfectly well. But if you're pivoting and changing on the dime, you're right. You are going to be bringing in what you've already had in the system. I just started doing Adobe Express with 5th graders. Okay, so these are 10-year-olds. And they're starting to create artificial intelligence images. Okay, so now they have student accounts, which is good. And it's the very first time they're actually prompting. They're seeing how what they put into it is what they're going to get out of it. Now, that's a very basic idea of how to prompt. But if you just write, a cow running, great, you're going to get a picture of a cow running. But if you were in your head thinking, I really wanted a cow running while holding a phone and, looking up at the moon, well, that's a whole different ballgame. You're going to get a whole different picture. So the more they are in tune to how they prompt, the better off they're going to be. And you're right, bringing in that past memory is going to be part of the deal.
You triggered a memory I had working with a visual arts teacher, 3rd grade. They had the question to me. They're like, I just feel stuck in trying to develop what you're asking for in the course, because mine's very visual arts, right? I'm teaching, shapes and colors and, how to compose things. And, I said, well, maybe we can brainstorm and just have some ideas, maybe how we could use this in your visual arts classroom. And the idea we came up with, he hasn't come back and tell me if this how it worked, but I was like, what if you could get a twofer here, in English language and visual arts? And what I mean by that is, what if you created a Mad Lib, where students got to fill in the noun, the verb, the adjectives to a visual art prompt that you're going to copy and paste and put into a text to image generator.
I like
and then
that idea.
They can see what comes up. Yeah, absolutely.
And
then it comes up. And then what if you said, let's see what that would look like if Picasso painted it, right? And then change the prompt to where put it in the style of Picasso. Well, maybe you're talking about cubism and you want to demonstrate now they got the image that they produced now is converted to cubism. And I said, do you think that would help them with their understanding and what that means? And, and it's that they kind of take some ownership of that image, right? That class did, because they filled in the words and the thing produced it. Maybe that ownership in the cognitive processes helps them better understand what cubism or whatever we're trying to do, right, as we go on.
And it's very personalized too. Each kid is going to come up with something different ideas.
Yeah. So I'm waiting to see if he comes back and he actually used it and how did it work. And one of the challenges he had too is he had a lot of non-English, first English, and he was like, maybe this will help, right? Maybe this will help with instructions and help maybe encourage English usage. So I'm always for twofers.
I like that. I think I'm going to borrow that idea and steal it and use use it, and I'll let you know how it works out with those fifth graders.
Yeah, I appreciate it. See if it's if there's any. The reason I say I like buy one get ones. When I was in the service, when you're a trainer, what's required of you to train every year seems like it takes more than a year to accomplish. Right. So you have to get creative. Like, all right, how am I practicing these skills all at the same time? Right. So I like to think about that, but I also like the idea of just, kind of understanding how the brain works, right? We're starting to know more and more. We used to treat it like as a single organ, right? It's just one piece and it does everything. And I think we're starting to know that it's like a lot of separate pieces. And the more you can get those different pieces to work together, the greater retention. So I think that's important too, right? So if we start to put some of these tasks together, now we absolutely have to understand cognitive load. You don't want to, put so much stuff together that you're just, exceeding what the students can actually accomplish. So, I mean, that's another aspect of, when I talk to teachers like, well, AI is going to replace me. No, it's not. It doesn't know your students. It cannot make those decisions about where they're at and how to get them, where's the safe area to get them where they feel confident and they understand the information and they can apply it, so you can build on it and not take them so far that they just become discouraged and quit. Right? It takes a human teacher to do that.
It's a great point that you bring up too, because then that also starts to go down the rabbit hole of ethical challenges, right? So let me ask you this. What ethical challenges do you foresee with the widespread adoption of AI tools like ChatGPT in education, others that are coming along the way? There's lots. And how do educators mitigate those risks? But before you answer that, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk more with Dr. Dwayne Wood and look at some of the ethical challenges that lie ahead. We'll be back in just 30 seconds, so don't go anywhere. Every classroom has the potential to be extraordinary, and the Logitech Reach Adjustable Content Camera is your partner in making that happen. With its flexible arm and clear video, you can showcase everything from detailed drawings to live experiments, ensuring every student is engaged and involved. Whether you're teaching in person or online, Logitech Reach helps you connect with your students in a whole new way. Ready to take your lessons further? Visit logitech.com/reach and elevate your classroom to a whole new level. Welcome back to Classroom Dynamics, where today we're talking with Dr. Dwayne Wood, an associate professor at National University. Before the break, I asked you about the ethical concerns of AI tools like ChatGPT and a slew of others for that matter that are flooding the technological and educational worlds that we all live in. As teachers adopt more tools into their repertoire, what do they have to look out for? What are some of those, pitfalls and things that they really have to look for in terms of using it ethically? And what suggestions can you make for teachers?
So you've probably seen, most people, if they've watched the news or read articles in this topic, whatever, you see this whole thing about academic integrity, right? Cheating, is this cheating? And so academic integrity, right, I think if you polled it, that's probably the number one concern, or of ethical and responsible use. I don't know. I kind of think about that as, again, I'm very authentic and practical related. So if I'm viewing education to prepare an individual for the real world and the real world of work, is this tool going to be available for them in that context? If the answer is yes, well, then I want them to use it, right? But to use it, to understand it, so they can use it in the appropriate way and responsible way. So we have to understand, again, some other issues like the potential of bias, right? We talked a little bit about, there can be a bunch of bias in there, and just our use of it can produce confirmation bias, right? It's just going to tell me what I believe already because it's the way I ask the question. I also think when it comes to this, it's dependency, in that if I'm using this to perform all my tasks and to do my thinking for me, I feel like we're going to lose this human intelligence aspect of it. It's going to get eroded, especially with some critical thinking skills, right? Creative thinking skills, cultural competencies, some things we've already kind of talked about. Those get eroded? And that to me is a concern. And to me, that's an ethical concern, and how that and responsible use. So we have to be able to help students understand that they can use this tool to augment their thinking, but not replace it. And that's really easy to say. When it comes down to actually how do we do that, it's a little harder. And we've talked a little bit, I think, in this conversation we've had, is some ways maybe to do that is, again, I think it's focus on the process of developing a product and being there and helping learners as they go through this and understand what their level of critical thinking is happening at each stage and phases. and have them recognize their thinking. It's that metacognition as they go through that process, and and do that all the time, and that becomes norm, right? And then we're actually improving critical thinking and metacognition versus eroding it while still collaborating with this AI tool to produce a great product, right? I honestly think, why do we form teams as humans? Well, it's because I have weaknesses, you have weaknesses, but my strengths offset your weaknesses and vice versa. So when we collaborate with an AI tool, I think the same thing, but it's still a collaboration, and we can't just have it do, and just completely replace our thinking. So
that's a great way to think about it too. If you really do think about it, being part of a team, because there are so many different ways you can go with AI.
Yeah. The other thing that, and I don't know if this maybe falls into ethical or I think it falls under responsible use, but think about how much screen time our youth are already on right now. And then we're saying we're going to use another tool that requires some more screen time. So to me, that's a concern. And the way that I think about this is something I like to tell when I used to train instructors for the Army. And I used to tell them, this is how you know if you're improving engagement in your classroom or not. Ask the question, what are your students doing? If they're watching the movie, they're probably not getting much out of it. But if they're playing the game, they're going to get more out of it. So what does that mean, right? What does that mean? Well, that means it matters what the student's doing. So let's say, yes, could I accomplish some domain knowledge transmission, maybe in a flipped classroom environment using AI about the biology of a tree, let's say, right? Yes, I can. But would that have a more or less impact if I took the students outside and we actually, engage with trees, right? So I think there's this, we have to be careful. And this is a pitfall just I think in any educational technology is this is a great thing. We're going to use it all the time. It's not necessarily the best solution. I tell my students, some of the best classes I ever taught was outside scratching in the dirt. My technology was a stick and some rocks, but it was the best course or class because students were engaged. And there was retention of the information and application of that in a real world context.
Right.
So it's how do we understand what a student needs to be successful, produce student value? That might not be that use of technology. It might be actually going somewhere and doing something or going outside and seeing it. Or I used to teach U.S. military history for the Army, and that can be very knowledge transmission, right? This date, this person did this, right? Type stuff. Well, I didn't like that at all because to me, what do you get out of that? So, one of the exercises I did, and I've shared this many times, but the classroom had hospital tile squares and they were all lined up so they weren't offset. So I cleared out all the furniture and those squares became grid squares on a map. And then I took masking tape and, all kinds of stuff and I laid out the battle. And then I assigned sides and I assigned people. And we started walking through and talking through the battle, but more than just who, what, when, we started asking why. Why did so-and-so make such a decision on the battlefield and start having those? That is applicable to the real world, not just the who, what, when. And that sticks with students. That stays with them versus you could ask ChatGPT to give you the key points of the Battle of Antietam. That probably is not going to last very long. But doing what we did, that stuck with students. And then, as a teacher, you like to see this, right? Further on lessons, you start seeing where they're using the techniques or something they applied during that in a future product, and you're like, yes, right. Yes. That is a win, and that's one of those qualitative metrics, right, that you could use to understand that I'm being effective. Now, where I see AI could also be helpful here, but it's also a concern, is privacy. Because it is powerful for computing data, especially maybe thematic analysis, right? If you got a bunch of qualitative data and you want to see what's coming. However, if that's student data, right now we have a problem, I think. We have to be careful how it's used. Again, it's completely open access. There's no guardrails here. Yes, most universities and most education institutions have, a privacy policy, but maybe they need to be reviewed, and updated and then articulated to the, users. To kind of understand it. I think that can be a concern. I tell the students, don't put anything in the system that you wouldn't put on social media, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's going to be open for open consumption. Just assume that. Right. It might not be because there's a way to partition, right? And try to keep it, but just assume that whatever you're putting in there, and that's going to keep you safe, right? When it comes to privacy. So that to me, that's a concern. I've seen people use these systems to grade assignments. Yes, I think maybe it's a starting point, but I'm a little skeptical on, is it really providing decent feedback, the depth of feedback? Because again, it doesn't know the student. It doesn't know the context. It only is producing what the next word is about, based upon a rubric, maybe that it's that you put in with it. So I like to say maybe it's a starting, but don't make it the final, say, right? It still needs to be reviewed by a teacher. And again, I've used the word teacher, but I like to think of myself again as a mentor coach, because I think that's a shift. We talk about, all the stuff we talked about is, well, yeah, a teacher's still important, right? And we got to have that human teacher involved in the education process. But what I think happens is the role shifts. They're no longer the sage on the stage, the knowledge transmission. I would argue you don't want to be sage on the stage anyways, but you're going to shift more now to that facilitator, maybe at the lower level, all the way up to that mentor at the higher, right? If we talk about kind of gauging it, and coach is somewhere in the middle, right? So I think that the role shifts. Now, are we preparing our educators for those roles? I don't know. Now, and that may factor. I have a little experience in K through 12, but more at the high school, not at the elementary levels. Maybe that doesn't work at the elementary level, what I'm talking, right? Because I like in the adult education space is adults come with experience. I want to use that experience, right, as part of the learning process. Well, elementary students don't have that experience, right? So, and they don't have any domain knowledge, right? They have zero. So that might not work in that space. And we need our experts in that realm to kind of say, here's what we need. This is how it could be used here. This is how we need to approach that. Once we establish, hey, what is the end state, right? We don't know an end state. It's different. There's still universities with a complete ban. I'm wondering how they enforce it and if it's actually working. How do they know it's working? I'd like to see if they have anything there, because students aren't going to. How are they banning it? Well, they just can't use the school Wi-Fi. They can't use it on school. Well, they got their own system, right? So
they're going to go on their own bandwidth. That hotspot's going to be there. So let me ask you this. We have about 2 more minutes left. If you were going to give a teacher, that could be on any grade level, even if it's elementary and going all the way up, if you were going to give them one piece of advice in the utilization of AI, what would you say to them?
Kind of have 2 things, but the first one is be skeptical. So any result that it produce, ask, right? Be skeptical of what the results produce. That I would say that's even outside of AI use. Any type of information you get, be skeptical, right? Because it may be an AI that's producing that whatever you're reading, you just don't know it. The other one is you just have to try it. You have to get in and you have to experiment with it. And there's a lot of great, what you're doing here with podcasts to try to provide information. There's a bunch of videos and courses that you can take to help. I've done a bunch of LinkedIn learning, and I picked up a lot just in some of those about, prompt engineering and how the system works. Again, I tend to treat it like a black box almost. I know a little bit, right? But I don't know all the inner workings of how it produces the result. But to me, that's not as important now as I'm trying to figure out, how it's going to be applied. So it's getting there and just experimenting with it, and not say that you have to apply whatever it gives you. Get in there and figure out those things, practice with it, experiment with it, and then start having those questions like, how would this help me in my practice? The answer might be, it won't. That's okay. It doesn't have to work, right? In your context, but just the process of thinking that question, how will this help me improve my practice, is that right there is gold, because you're starting to think about your context and how this might work. And again, if technology is not integrated completely into the curriculum, it's just an afterthought, and you're probably not going to get the gains that you think you're going to get. At best, it's probably neutral. At worst, it's going to have a negative impact on learning. And we have to understand this as cognitive load, right? If I don't understand how to use a tool that you're telling me that I got to use, that's already going to create cognitive load, right? So I have less room for any other activity afterwards. I have a personal experience on that one. I had to take statistics, right? And we had to get this fancy calculator. And the first statement in the syllabus was, I'm not here to teach you how to use the calculator. And I was like, oh my goodness. So, we have to kind of understand that when we integrate technology, we have to think about our audience, think about our students, what's their barriers, what challenges are they going to have? That's important, because that's going to dictate our actions.
That's fantastic information. And the advice, I think every teacher, whether you're a new teacher or you're a seasoned teacher, that's something you definitely want to listen to and try to follow, because it's here. It's going to stay. Nothing we could do about it. And you're going to have to start to learn how to integrate it. So listen, this has been such a great conversation, really informative. The learning experiences of tomorrow will surely be something that continues to evolve as time just continues to march on. It's clear that even that integration between technology and what we used to know flow is definitely going to be there. And, education is just becoming rich with potential and also responsibility. And I think that's important to look at as well. I want to thank you for the time today. As we look ahead, it's educators like yourself that are going to lead the charge in ensuring that these advancements not only enhance learning, but also uphold the values that matter most, which is what we talked about today: critical thinking, creativity, and ethical integrity. So thank you so much for joining us and the time for today.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Again, just having these conversations, I think I learned like 4 or 5 points just having a conversation with you today. So thank you for that. I'm very appreciative of that.
I appreciate that. Well, for those of you who have been listening, thank you for tuning in today, and make sure that you share what you've learned or any takeaways or reflections that you've had, and tag us on Twitter at Class Dynamics or Instagram at Classroom Dynamics Podcast. We always look forward to hearing your thoughts on our episodes and sharing the different ways in which you're using what you've learned. You can also help support Classroom Dynamics with as little as $3 a month at classroomdynamicspodcast.buzzsprout.com. Once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Dwayne Wood for joining us. Really been a pleasure having you. I think that this is an important topic that's just going to get bigger and better as we go on. So thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Classroom Dynamics, where knowledge and inspiration meets innovation. I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion and found it both insightful and uplifting. As always, my goal is to provide you with practical strategies, engaging stories, and powerful insights that can fuel your motivation as an educator. I believe when knowledge and inspiration do come together, incredible things can happen in your classroom. And for all of you who think it's too late to strengthen your craft, I challenge you to make it your mission to do so. You've worked hard to get to where you are today, and it's never too late to infuse new life into your work. So why not make today that day to do so? I'm Adam Todd, and you've been listening to Classroom Dynamics, a teacher podcast. You can follow Classroom Dynamics on X at Class Dynamics and on Instagram at Classroom Dynamics Podcast. If you haven't already, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. We'll be back soon with more captivating conversations, inspiring stories, and strategies that you can implement into your everyday routines. Until then, keep igniting that spark in your classroom and never stop believing in the incredible impact that you have as an educator. You're more powerful and inspirational than you think. Did you miss our episode, Understanding the Reading Brain in a Digital World, a conversation with Dr. Marianne Wolf? If so, join me as I sit down with renowned cognitive neuroscientist and literacy advocate, Dr. Marianne Wolf, to explore the reading brain in a digital world. Dr. Wolf, director of UCLA's Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice, and also the author of Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World, shares her groundbreaking insights on screens and ebooks, the science of reading, and transformative strategies like the RAVO program. Whether you're an educator, parent, or simply passionate about literacy, this episode delivers a powerful conversation on the future of reading.
If the screen is available, we can get the gist of that information quickly and efficiently, and then we go on our way. Now, the downside of that is that if we compare it to print, there's a big difference in how the eye movements work, how the intention of the reader works, and very importantly, whether there is time for us to give attention to the really beautifully complex processes of the reading brain when we first learned it.